When I say the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin, what do you think of? Fists in the air, headbanging, Robert Plant's primal Viking-like war cry at the beginning? What you might not realise is that this song was very much Led Zeppelin's attempt at humour. I mean, some skinny English boys in their 20s likening themselves to Vikings and Nordic gods. No, it was all tongue-in-cheek. But it actually turned out a lot more biographical than they had planned. Hi, I'm Adam, welcome back to Music Mongoose. If you learn anything new in this video, I'd really love you to subscribe to the channel. Cheers. Now, to tell the story of this song, a good place to start would probably be with the album on which it appears, Led Zeppelin III, because the album and the song do not share the same origins. Since Led Zeppelin's beginnings in 1968, the group were kept incredibly busy. 2 best-selling albums, worldwide tours, and a cult following as they pioneered this shift from 60s psychedelic rock to a more heavier rock in the 70s. By 1970, the group needed a bit of a breather, and that would come in the form of Bron-Yr-Aur. Yes, amazingly, that random collection of letters is actually a remote 18th century cottage in Snowdonia, Wales. Plant had visited this cottage on holiday as a child, so suggested that he and Page spend some time there to relax and write. A change from the chaotic touring schedule that was the year of 1969. There, Plant and Page lived without electricity, without distraction, and really got to write from their hearts. Later, in 1970, the pair reunited with John Bonham and John Paul Jones and started putting their next album together. Page later said about the stay, "It was the first time I really came to know Robert. Actually living together at Bron-Yr-Aur, as opposed to occupying nearby hotel rooms, the songs took us into areas that changed the band." And change the band it did. Well, sort of. You see, when Led Zeppelin III hit the shelves, fans and critics alike were quick to note that the album had a much more folky, acoustic vibe to it. Much different to the offerings from Led Zeppelin I and II. I mean, those first 2 albums were heavy, pounding rock, heavy blues, electric stuff. Whereas this new one was slightly more unplugged. Although of course it did have its heavier moments. And the reason for that is of course that Page and Plant were literally unplugged out in that cottage in Wales. Having no electricity inspired them to lean more on acoustic arrangements and to experiment with their sound. And of course, Led Zeppelin's overall catalogue is full of examples like this. Houses of the Holy, In Through the Outdoor, both prime examples of musical experimentation from the group and subverting expectations from the fans. Despite this, critics were pretty damning of the album, and this upset Jimmy Page. Jimmy believes that the press just didn't understand what Led Zeppelin were trying to do. He even called the Rolling Stone review of the album a hatchet job. They damned the album for being mainly acoustic, despite the group showing great examples of acoustic tracks from their first 2 LPs. Black Mountainside, for example, or Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, both from their debut album. And that track in particular, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, serves as a much calmer point in that album. And Page would call this lots of light and shade in the music. And that, I think, is what Led Zeppelin were trying to do with their 3rd album. Showing their range as a band and refusing to be pigeonholed into one type of heavier rock. And it's so interesting, isn't it, to think how the setting of that cottage influenced so much about the overall product of that 3rd album. However, there was one song on that album, the explosion of the opener in fact, that was very different from the rest, the Immigrant Song. Before we go into more depth about the song, just a quick reminder, if you're enjoying the video or if you're learning anything new, do subscribe to the channel. Cheers. Now, like I said, the Immigrant Song didn't come from the stay in the Welsh cottage with the funny sounding name, it came from the period following it. In between writing, recording and rehearsing the new album, the group filled their time with shows, one of which was to take place in Iceland. In fact, the band had been invited by the Icelandic government to play a show in Reykjavik on the 22nd of June. However, the show almost never took place. Plant later explained, The day before we arrived, all the civil servants went on strike and the gig was going to be cancelled. The university prepared a concert hall for us and it was phenomenal. The response from the kids was remarkable and we had a great time. Plant also explains that this trip was the inspiration for the Immigrant Song. Immigrant Song was about that trip, and it was the opening track on the album that was intended to be incredibly different. The track also set the musical direction for Led Zeppelin IV. Now, to any outsider looking at these lyrics, they would seem completely pretentious, right? They're calling themselves Vikings, marauders, gods of rock. They need to get over themselves. But like I said at the beginning, the lyrics are meant to be tongue-in-cheek. And they were simply inspired by their trip to Iceland. Iceland was first settled by the Vikings, after all. The opening lyrics, for example. We come from the land of the ice and snow, from the midnight sun where the hot springs flow. Yeah, I mean, those ominous opening lines might evoke imagery of Vikings and setting off for conquest, but really it was inspired by Iceland, the land of ice and snow. A place that has what's called polar days in the summer, which is when the sun never sets. It's 24 hours of sunlight, midnight sun. And Iceland is also very well known for its geothermal features, hot springs being a standout. So yes, it's evocative of the Vikings, but in that tongue-in-cheek way. Page and Plant are squeezing their lovely trip to Iceland through a Norse Viking rock and roll filter. It's incredible songwriting. And this Nordic theme continues throughout the song, of course. The hammer of the gods will drive our ships to new land to fight the horde, sing and cry, Valhalla, I am coming. The hammer of the gods in those lines is Mjolnir, Thor's hammer from Norse mythology. And in these lyrics, it's guiding both the Vikings on their conquest, but also Led Zeppelin in conquering the world of rock and roll. Again, a little tongue-in-cheek play on Norse themes. And of course, in many ways, Led Zeppelin did go on to conquer the world of rock and roll. They became one of the biggest live acts of the 70s, travelling all over the globe. How soft your field so green can whisper tales of gore, of how we calmed the tides of war. We are your overlords. Like the Vikings, Plant and Page felt like they had conquered Iceland. I mean, it's a pretty rock and roll feather in your cap, isn't it? At this point, fresh from the buzz of being invited by the Icelandic government to play a show, they really did feel like they were on top of the world. They really did feel like Vikings, conquering the planet with their music. And this inspiration created one hell of a song. The marching, galloping drum beat from John Bonham makes you feel like you're riding into battle with them, accompanied by Page's repetitive, almost hypnotic riff. Gives that sense of tunnel vision, that one collective goal of conquest. John Paul Jones's bass kicks in much later than the drums, almost giving that second wind, that second wave, strengthening the whole battle-focused arrangement. And of course, the primal war cries and emotive vocals of Plant make you feel like you want to fall into formation and rally behind the band as they go to war. And perhaps that's exactly what the band were doing with this song, a symbolic marker that says we're going to war. It's like they were doubling down their assault in becoming the greatest band in the world. They liken themselves, again in a tongue-in-cheek way, to Viking marauders. Like them, they were going to battle, and they were setting sort of a prophecy for themselves. I mean, this track was a war cry in itself. It was Led Zeppelin sending a warning to every other person, every other band making music on the planet. They were saying, we're coming, we're not finished. We're only just beginning. And despite its tongue-in-cheek nature, fans of the band were fully on board. When they heard Plant singing, Valhalla I am coming, they were ready to give themselves over completely to their new rock gods. But for Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, this was never the intention. Plant in particular was just fascinated by Norse mythology and the history of the Vikings, and wrote that into an anthem of ambition for Led Zeppelin, with a humorous edge to it. And this song wouldn't be the first time that Led Zeppelin decided to flex their humorous muscles. On the album Houses of the Holy was the song Jamaica, spelt like this, but pronounced Jamaica. The title itself was part of a joke that Jimmy Page liked. Someone says to a friend, my wife has gone to the West Indies, the friend replies, Jamaica? And then he replies, no, she wanted to go. The idea is that in an English accent, the word Jamaica sounds like, did you make her? And that's where the song title came from, because Page felt it would reflect the more reggae vibe to the track. Bonham hated the song, so did John Paul Jones, and American DJs were constantly mispronouncing the song title as Dire Mak'er, which just added to the confusion of the whole thing, really. And the song was a bit of a flop, with most critics damning the attempt from Led Zeppelin. And they never once played it live, which probably goes to show how they felt about the track in the end. Back to the Immigrant Song, Robert Plant said in Rolling Stone magazine that the song was supposed to be powerful and funny. It seems, however, that the powerful side of the track overshadowed the funny side. The Immigrant Song stands as one of their few hit singles. Hey Hey What Can I Do was on the B-side, and it released on November 5th, 1970. It reached number 16 on the US Billboard Hot 100 and stayed in the charts for 13 weeks. It was also a top 20 hit in Australia, Japan, Austria, the Netherlands, Spain, South Africa, Germany, Canada, New Zealand, Switzerland, and Denmark. Just as the song prophesised, right? Now, another act that was conquering the world in the 60s and 70s was Elvis Presley. Did you know, though, that Led Zeppelin crossed paths with Elvis on multiple occasions, each one slightly more surprising than the last? I've made a video about it, you can click here to watch that one next.